Hello fellow coding rabbits, and welcome to live coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript. My name is Sean, and tonight is the first episode that we have a webcam rolling during the live stream, so I'm super stoked about that. And if I am a little bit awkward because of it, then I'm getting used to it, so whatever. But thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of live coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript. Tonight is episode 5 of the Vue Basics series, and we're going to be talking about components and props, the building blocks of Vue.js. So, sorry. And if you want to get, what I'm going to do really quick is pull up the GitHub link. Actually, it's right here. I just want to copy this. Okay, so link is in the description. It's also in the chat if you want to check it out, and you can follow along. Everything is current. You just gotta switch to the episode 5 session start branch. And it looks like Joshua is in the chat, so hey, how's it going, dude? He's off at camp and doing summer stuff and activities, so we haven't been seeing too much of him lately, but I hope he's having a good time so far. And it's awesome to see you in the chat tonight. Happy Friday. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. And okay, so components and props in Vue.js. So far we've learned a lot about the fundamentals of Vue, and we're able to make some pretty neat things. Yes, things is a technical term. We're still missing some very important building blocks for building Vue apps, and those are components and props. Now we're going to learn all about building components, using props in components, and the parent-child data relationship that ties everything together. The first part of this is we're going to look at components. So I have a link to the Vue docs if you want to check out their source of information on it. And basically, so components are our JavaScript Lego pieces, are essentially our building blocks that we use to compose full apps and websites by combining and structuring these pieces together in, optimal and very modular ways based on features and based on application requirements and just the overall app layout and website layout and stuff like that too. So kind of like component trees and whatnot. So Vue gets its influence from components components and props from other reactive frameworks like React.js and Angular 2. So you can see that, like we've talked about before, that Vue gets its inspiration from kind of like the best of a bunch of different frameworks kind of combined into one really awesome, solid framework, kind of the best of all these different worlds. So to get a better understanding of why we use components, we must first understand the structure of a website or an application. So applications are quite large, have a number of many different features going on and views that make up the app. These different parts can be broken up to smaller, more efficient pieces and can help to abstract away obtrusive layering. And so this also makes our code easier to read, it's easier to kind of reason about, and it's also a lot easier to write. So some benefits right there from using a component-based build style when developing. So let's take a look at how this might work visually. So right here is I have the Vue.js component tree model, and this is from the Vue docs from Vue's website or whatever, but I added a little bit of text to it so it is a little bit less abstract. And so if we look at this, we basically have a web page on the left side, right, and we have the component tree of that web page on the right here. And so if we look at the top level, so the top level that we have for our root component would be the web page or the web view that we're in, and that could be housed as a Vue container component or whatever. So it will be like a container that will act as our Vue. And so inside of that, we'll have three main components in our Vue, and we'll have a header. We'll have, this could be, you know, a news feed. It could be whatever type of like feed or some sort of like generated list kind of thing. And then the other part would be like a sidebar with some sort of like gallery that you could have in there. So in this example, I have a header, a news feed, and then a grid gallery. And the header by itself is it's a singular component. It doesn't have any nested components in it. So that kind of like ends the tree there. You can see how they're kind of broken up into different features and different parts of the layout, and you can kind of organize your code base and build your components based on those two kind of concepts right there. So if we look a little bit further into the next level into our component tree, we have the child components of the parent components of their parent components. So you look at the news feed component, and it has two child components, which are two news item components. And really what this would be like is just it would be just one child component. We would only have one news item component that we would iterate, you know, loop over using v-for and dynamically generate that same component multiple times with different information in it using one of the Vue directives that we talked about in a previous stream. It looks like Vanilla is in the chat, and I just wanted to say hello because he's not going to be staying long. It's 4 a.m. there, so thanks for tuning in, and make sure you get some sleep. Don't stay for long because you can always watch the video later, so thank you. Glad you can tune in too, Joshua. It's cool. Little burned out, but having a nice break in a real house for the weekend. Yeah, the outdoors could be rough sometimes. So, well, I'm glad you're having a good time. Anyways, back to the Vue stuff. So, kind of the same concept as the news items. If we look at the grid gallery component, and you can see that it has multiple grid items as their child components to the grid item or grid gallery parent component. So again, that's probably something we wouldn't hard code these in, you know, manually. We would just use the v-for directive to loop through them and iterate over some sort of data set and create those components dynamically. So like a grid, an image gallery, you know, a grid gallery, whatever it might be. So, excuse me. So I'm just yeah, so we're just looking over this diagram a little bit more. So a view is often referred to as a view, like this root node, the whole like view container that would often be called referred to as a view when building multi-page apps or larger apps. It can be views in a spa as well, but it's not quite the same concept when you're doing a single page versus a multi-page. But basically any type of like screen or a different web page is going to be its own view. So yeah, a view is just a component but acts as our page skeleton. Sometimes you'll see an actual views directory in the root level, so inside the source folder, versus them being in the components folder, because a view would kind of classify different pages, and then the components would be what you use to kind of fill out those pages. So just a different way of organizing views versus components, because they are different even though they're all view instances. They act in different purposes. So single page applications, or SPAs, are the view container or page container component stays intact, and basically the child components get updated inside of it dynamically. So we can use what's known as dynamic components, and we'll talk about more about what those are next week. But basically we can just switch out our view to be like, you know, a home, an about, contact, and it would all just sit in the same web page I mean, it's all in the index.html, but it's just going to be changing out that entire view as like a component, as if it were just like an entire component. So we'll talk about more about that next week, but yeah, for right now, just know that there's concepts of views, and there's also like the concept of components, and the view is a component. So we all know a good example of this type of root level component quite well already, actually. And if we remember our good old friend, the app.view, that's an example of a view, because it's basically our root containering component. It houses our app. It's a little bit different than a view because it is our complete root node for the project, but you would have the views be changed in through here, and then that would in turn change the content structures based on what view was being shown or loaded. So okay, let's see, where are we at? Okay, so yeah, just breaking it down a little bit. We're not going to read through all this stuff because we just went through it. So this is just a simple example, but we can already see how greatly improved our code becomes using these patterns of development, whereas we would need each and every element hard-coded in HTML and then updating the contents of that element with vanilla JavaScript. And we can see where like these giant monolithic files and code bases come from really quickly because of the amount, just the amount of sheer code that it takes to do that. That type of like development for projects like that make it a breeze to do in like React and Vue and Angular and stuff like that. So keeps our code clean, simple, and dry by utilizing its many ways to modularize and optimize our apps. Cool. So yeah, so a view would kind of be like the containing kind of, yeah, you got it right, Vanilla. It's like kind of just like a containing container component that we would use, you know, our header component, and then like a news feed, and then some, maybe another view would have the header component, and then it would have like an entire image gallery kind of thing. So it all depends on what you do, and it's really just like, you know, convention. So because there's nothing that differentiates a view between a component, you know, because they're both just view instances under the hood, and there's nothing different about them in the way that Vue interprets it. But we just use that as kind of like an organization and a development and a convention. So I hope that makes sense. And then once we get into more apps and more coding and stuff like that, we can demonstrate that a little bit more as well. So when we have these components, okay, so we're going to move to declaring and registering components. And so when we have components, in order to use them in our app, we have to declare them, write them if we're using a global declaration, view.component. Or we have to register them locally on different Vue instances that we want to use that component on as a child. And so first we'll talk about the globally declared and registered components. So when we globally declare and register a new component, it's going to be, the main benefit from doing it like that is it's going to be available to us, and any component on any Vue instance, we're going to have access to it without having to locally register it on that Vue instance. So it can be really helpful to have access to something that you're going to need to use throughout the app. So if you have, you know, a number of different reusable components that are being used everywhere, you could break those out into, in theory, break those out into globally registered declared components that could be accessible via any of the Vue instances that you have. But it can create, there's a couple drawbacks. It can create some maintainability issues, because from what I understand, but it's really good for reusable generic components. Like I said, sometimes like a custom input or like a user alert. So let's take a look at the example of how it looks like to declare a component globally. So you can see down here, I got this basic syntax right here. So when we use the Vue.component method, it takes two arguments, and the first argument is going to be the component name. So it's going to be a string that contains the component name, and it's going to have to be in quotes, so a string, and you want to have it valid HTML, so all lowercase and hyphen delimited, and yeah. And then so the second option is going to be the options object that we pass, essentially that holds our Vue instance properties. So everything that is going to be compiled into our Vue instance, just like we would have like our export default. So that's essentially what the options object is when we're declaring it like this. Let's see. So you can see that with this we have, you know, our data function, we have data, we have some methods and stuff like that, but we have a little bit of a different method or a different way of going about writing the actual markup for this component. We're limited to the having a template property on our data or our options object, and then we have to pass in some sort of like HTML inline with ES6 template literals. So it works just fine, and like I said, for small reusable components, like so for example, this is like this would be a component for so this would be a component for like a reusable it's right in front of me and I can't think of it, message, like a user message. And so basically we just have takes and sets a class based on the type of error, and it displays the message text in there, a message or an error has occurred, and then it just displays it conditionally if there is a message. So it's not a complete example, but basically this is going to be declared in our main.js file. So if we want to declare, like so Vanille was asking, how do we declare a Vue component as global? When you are using the Vue global API, so anything that's Vue.a method attached, we have to do that in our main.js. So we would in fact have that code in here, and then we would just type it in there. So I'm not going to copy and paste it in, or I can copy and paste it in, I guess, but let's see. Where is it? Here it is. Let's see what this does. Now I don't ever do this. I don't ever declare, I haven't really ever declared any components. What is this telling me? Missing space before opening brace. Okay.
Equally, you don't know
strings must be single quotes.
how the universe shines the stars.
Interesting. Okay, so I don't really ever do the Vue.component to declare it because I just like having, I like to go about the local registration method because I like to use the Vue single file components in order to kind of like do this stuff. But this is for, you know, if you do want to declare something globally and have access to it, something simple, you could go like that. And then I think you have to do Vue.u, or no, you don't. You can just, I think this is all you actually have to do. So if we were to say, bring this in, let me just make this comma. App.vue, let's see if we can just pull it in right here and see what this does. Component dash name, oops. Alright, so let's spin this project up really quick and see what happened. This is as much a learning experience right now for me as it is for everybody else, so... Oops, I gotta go into the right directory. So we're in hello world, so cd into hello world, and now let's spin up the dev server. How are we doing on time? Cool. All right. Okay, so let's see. Where's my documents? Here we go. Okay, so I'm just referring to the docs really quick on this to see what the correct way is. Okay, so let's see what we have here. And I'll bring this over here. RabbitWerks rules. All right, let's see. Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. Let me take a look at this spot really quick. All right. Do we do it in the main.js or is it in the app.vue file? Can we declare a single file component as global? I don't think so. I think, as far as I know, I think that's like because it's it's not just like a JavaScript object or whatever. There's the template, the script, and the style tag, and it gets compiled into that. So I think whenever we have a Vue component, like a single file component, like the Hello World one, like we just have to register it locally on the component that we want to use. Otherwise, we have to go about like the global, the Vue global API of like registering it. I want to see though if it's just supposed to be in one of these script tags and not the main.js. And because that should be all that we have to do. Let me just I'm gonna pull it out of here and bring it into here and see what that gives us. Vue is not defined. If we say import Vue from Vue, oh, it's still giving me the thing. So we need a template compiler is not available. Either pre-compile the templates into render functions or use the compiler included build. Okay, well, you know what? I'll look into this a little bit more and up my knowledge and bring it back next week about how to properly do that complete. Like I said, obviously I don't ever use the global declaration of Vue components. So I'll figure it out and I will report back. But until then, let's move on to the locally registered stuff. So and then if you want to check out these two links, although they're not very part of this Vue documentation, isn't the most clear on how to do it. Maybe it's just me, but we'll figure it out and we'll come back to it. So So yeah, like I said, the main restrictions for doing it this way is that we don't get access to like a style block. So style classes must live in a CSS file, or they have to be inline. And we don't get a template block. We just have to worry about the template tag. So yeah, so but it's been so we can do this if we want, but it's recommended best practice to declare components in their own Vue file and register them to parent components locally. But there are, use cases like we were talking about, like the custom inputs and stuff like that, where you just want to kind of have it available everywhere, and that would be very useful. So I do want to learn how to figure out or learn how to do that properly, and then bring it back and teach everybody. Okay, so moving on. So we're at locally registered components. So when we go the route of local component use, we go about it a little differently than globally registered components. We use our Vue single file components locally by first importing it to the desired component into the desired parent component, and then registering on that parent component. Once we're finished doing that, we can use our new child component in the template wherever and however many times we want. So how is this done? Well, our Vue instance has a components object that we can use to register our imported components, and there's a couple ways to register a component. We can do Pascal case, which is registering the component using Pascal case, and then Vue behind the scenes will convert this to the all lowercase kebab case that will be valid HTML for custom elements. And then the kebab case is registering the component as using kebab case, and this is what Vue does behind the scenes when we're using Pascal case by default. But using kebab case, we can customize the name a little bit more of the component when we're using it in the template. Because you can see the first instance here is when we are registering it using Pascal case. So first we have to import it. So we're importing the component name we want by, from components, features, feature item, component name. So the path to that component, and then inside of our export default object, so our Vue instance here, we have our components object inside of that, and then we're just simply doing the ES6 duplicate name property shorthand, which would be the same as it would be component name for the key, and then the same component name for the value. So it's just the ES6 syntax, which is required for doing it this way. Now you can see, if we look at the next example, this is how I go about doing the my component registration and stuff, because I like to use the kebab case to get, because the way that I like to name my components, which if you are familiar with the stream, or familiar with the stream and the previous videos, we've talked about like my different naming conventions where I use single dashes for spaces, and then if it's some sort of like modifier or like suffix, then I'll do a double dash and then the value after that kind of thing. So component dash dash name, if we had a component, it would be like a component date, so it'd be component dash dash date. Yeah, whatever. So that's how I do my my naming conventions for stuff like this. And you can see that if I were to do it with the Pascal case naming import and registration method, then I wouldn't be able to do that, because it would just generate out to the singular dash, and I want to have the double dash because it, like I said, it's my naming convention or whatever. So that's just one use case, but it makes a good point in demonstrating why it's useful. So that's the way I go about it, and it works for me. So let's see. Alright, so importing and registering components in this way is also known as modularization. We are creating modules of components based on their functionality and feature set, which in turn helps to keep our code base clean and organized. Oh, where did my water go? I'm so thirsty here. I don't know. Sad day. Okay. I guess that helped a little bit. Components by themselves are good and we can build some cool features using them, right? But we're still missing some crucial pieces to really be able to build off of each other. Components aren't meant to be closed off to the rest of the app, and oftentimes we need to use our data throughout these components and component trees. So the way we go about communicating to these Vue instances, through these Vue instances, you know, the same sets of data and like data to child components and whatnot, is by using what are known as props. And again, props are you know, come from React, again, with the concept of components and props. It's basically a way to pass data from a parent to a child component. So props are like the connections between these, you know, parent and child components, and we use props to pass data from the parent component down to the child component. So we utilize props as if they're custom attributes on our elements and our components, and these attributes in turn pass their values into the Vue instance that they're attached to. So there are two aspects to using props that we must stay aware of in Vue, right? So let's take a look at first what it looks like when we're sending a prop to a child. So this is the parent component that we're looking at right now. So right now, if we're going off of our example from the diagram, we have our news item component that we are passing props to from our data object. So in here we have our news item, and normally we would have multiple news items, so we would have like an array of news items all containing an object with all this stuff in here, not just a singular object. But for demonstration purposes, we just have this. So what we do is, let's see. All right. So what we do is we have our component, our child component, this news item. Excuse me. Okay, so this is our news feed component, and we're importing our news item child component. We're registering it on our parent component right here, and we're putting it into our template, so we're using that now. So we're passing some props to our, you know, I guess we could just demonstrate this. I don't know why I'm just breaking it down so much. But okay, so let's just go into here and we can clean up all of this stuff. We'll demonstrate some more props. The cool stuff. So we have our hello world. Let me clear this out really quick, and I'm gonna bring that over here. Bring this over here. Not this one, actually. The web page. There we go. Right on. Okay. Clear this out. We don't need that. Okay, so we're gonna write a little message in here. It's gonna say hello from the parent component, just like that. We also have our name and our age attribute or properties in here like we did before. All right, cool. So we have this hello world component that is graciously been generated to us by Vue. So, and we're already passing our message in. So we use props in conjunction with vbind in order to dynamically pass data into there. So if we didn't use, so right here you can see it has the colon, and if this is essentially if it was just saying vbind message equals message, and that's referring to our message property on on our Vue instance, right? So just to keep a shorthand, the shorthand syntax going with the vbind, we're just going to use the colon. And when we look at our hello world, so we can take a look at our Vue dev tools, pull up, open this up, and our hello world. It's going to say hello from the parent component, and that's being passed down as a prop, right? So if we were to not use vbind in this, then it would just essentially, it would still pass a prop down to the parent, to the child component. It's just not going to be a dynamic value. It's not going to be this message data property that we have on our data object. It's going to be just like it were essentially a hard-coded string. So if I show that right here, you can see I delete the colon, so it's not vbinding to it anymore. And you can look at right here on our dev tools. I'm going to bring this up so we can see it a little bit better. So you can see props down here. It just says message, just like we had it in there. And I can just, you know, type whatever I want in there and it'll update. So that's not necessarily what we want, but sometimes it could be the behavior we want. So remember to get that dynamic data passed into the prop, our prop. We just vbind to the attribute or the prop that we're attaching to. So let's set that back up. So we have message is equal to message, and it's sending it to the child component. So that's how we start with the parent component, and now we're going to take a look at going from the parent component, or we're going to look at the child component and see what we do on that end of it, or that aspect of it, to make this go full circle. So one thing about you can actually see it's already done. So we just have, I'll just delete that for now, and you can, so the thing to keep in mind about working with props is that it's one-way data flow and should always be treated as such. So if I were to try and like change the value of a prop that was passed into the child component, it would give me an error saying that even though it can change that value, it's not going to reflect, and it will be reset back to the initial value being passed in on the next re-render, because it's props are essentially read-only. And if we do, for whatever reason, need to pass any type of, take that value and pass, or if, I guess a better way to say is, if for whatever reason, if we ever need to pass data from a child component to a parent component, then we can use these things called, you know, custom events, which we talked about a little bit. We've talked about a little bit, but that's something you should be wary of. I know that the Vue docs seem to be, last time I was reading them, seem to be pretty adamant about using custom events, but I don't necessarily agree with that. And most of the talks and stuff that I've heard people talking about custom events on seem to agree with the way that we were talking about, how they're just very unmaintainable after a while. So just keep that in mind. So really, if you find yourself you have to pass a bunch of data from, you know, not just child to parent back up to the parent, but just kind of pass data all around, it's better to incorporate something like vuex state management, so that way you have access to all of your state on any of the components, essentially depending on what you bring into it from our vuex store. So again, we'll talk about vuex soon as well. That's very cool, but we just need to get through this stuff first, and then we can start to see, because we'll start to see where that really takes benefit too. So props are one-way data flow from the parent to the child. Okay, so we're in our child component and we have our props object, or there's two ways that we can set up the syntax for defining our props on our child object or child component. So the first way is the simple way to do it. It's the array syntax. So there's the array syntax and there's the object syntax for registering props. And so first we'll show the array syntax. So it's simply just a property on our default object, or export default object. So props, or prop, or I'm sorry, props with an S, and that is equal to an array. And so each element or each entry of this array is needs to be a string, and it needs to be equal to the name of the prop that we're passing in. So basically whatever we have it named as the attribute right here for our prop needs to reflect it as a string in the array, just like that. So we have message if we had another one. So let's go ahead and send so you can, or before we do that, let's take a look, and you can see that it says message hello from the parent component, and right here it's showing attributes because it is like a custom attribute essentially. So that is the array syntax. So let's send a couple more props through here to our hello world component. So the next one we'll do is name, and we will set name equal to name, just like that. And then the next one we will do is age is equal to age, if I can find where my buttons are. And just for the heck of it, we'll demonstrate a hard-coded prop to see that it still works in conjunction with each other. So we'll just do hard-coded, and that will say equals this is a hard-coded string. And so let's take a look back in our Vue DevTools. And you can see, oh, it's so strange. I wonder why this one's getting sent in under the props. I think that has to do with like the inherit props attribute, or inherit attributes property that we can adjust with the Vue API, which is a little bit technical. So essentially they're going to be treated as the same thing. They're all just props, but technically props are just custom attributes. So if we were to look at the Vue instance, we could see that we would have access to all four of them on the attributes as well. So let's see if we try to do something. Oh, you know why? Because I see it right there. You know why? Because right now we're passing in these guys. We have our props set up on here, but we haven't registered them yet. So Vue is treating all of these as just custom attributes, if that makes sense. So you can see if we add in our other props here, we can say name, and you can see it switches. Name is now in the props. So yeah, that was what was going on. So my bad. Gotta remember it. And then we have hard coded, just like that. It needs to be a string, otherwise it'll think it's a variable. So yeah, all of them are in there. They're all props and all that stuff. So this is the array. If we try to change something, so let's do. In our export default, let's write a mounted hook, lifecycle hook. So we'll do mounted, which is a function. And can't forget our comma. All right, so mounted function. And what we'll do is try and say this dot message, this dot props dot message. Hello, if I can type, from the child component. All right, so this dot message. Okay, so here's the warning that I was talking about. So let's just refresh it, and you can say avoid. It says avoid mutating a prop directly, since the value will be overwritten whenever the parent component re-renders. Instead, use a data or computed property based on the prop's value being mutated, and then it tells me what prop is being mutated. So what it's saying is that I would want to set up something like a computed property, and so I would say computed and our object. And so in here we will do updated message, just like that. And that will be a function, and it will return I don't know. I mean we can add an exclamation point to the end of it, I guess, because like we could just rewrite it, whatever, and that's not a very good example. But so let's just say return this dot message plus a string, like that. All right, so let's see what that gives us now. We can actually get rid of this mounted hook because that's giving us an error. And if we look in the Vue dev tools, let's see what it gives us. So updated hello from the parent component. So yeah, it gives us that. It's not, we're not changing the prop anymore. So we're taking the value of the prop and then doing something with it. Or we could do, instead of just adding something like that, we could do uppercase message. So this dot message dot to uppercase. Right? No. Work. There we go. Hello from the parent component, all uppercase. So you can see, I don't know, you get the value from it. Use a computed property to do some sort of like further processing of that data without adjusting the props, you know, without targeting the props. So looks like Matthew's in the chat. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the stream. It's the first one with the webcam. So anyways, we're talking about some props right now in Vue.js, and hope you had a good week. Thanks for tuning in, buddy. All right, where are we at? So this is the array syntax, which is all fine and dandy, but okay, so we want a little bit more finite control. We want a little bit more finite control of our props, right? So we can take advantage of prop validation that Vue provides to us by using the object syntax versus, let me just scroll down here. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see. Yeah, so the object syntax. So we'll break this down and we'll take our example that we have and we'll convert it from our array syntax to object syntax. You can see that the array syntax is just, it's quite simple. And then the object syntax can be quite, you know, quite verbose, but it really gives us, you know, really good control. So we get stuff like type checking, which we can tell Vue what types are acceptable and which are not. We can get a required attribute or required property that is by default it's false, but we can set it to true, and that way it'll always be required, otherwise it'll throw an error. We can set a default value for each prop. We can set a default value of an object if we want. We just need to use kind of like what's known as a factory function to return a new object. So just like the data object or whatever on our Vue instance, just how our data must be a function that returns a new object. That is essentially a factory function that's returning a new object. So that's all it is doing, is it's just creating a new object, putting properties in there and returning it. Otherwise we wouldn't be able, we have to do that syntax, otherwise Vue won't know what to do and it'll just always just use the first value it comes across. So at least that's my understanding. And then we can also do another type of validation to make sure that it is we pass in a value. It's basically a validate is a function that runs, we give it a value, and then we say return some of our values of an array that we're passing in or whatever, and then if the value is found, then you can say value, returns the value of things, of the array entry. So I hope that makes sense. It's kind of a convoluted example, but basically it searches the array, and if it returns if it returns a 1, not a -1, then it's going to know that one of the values is correct, and it's going to use that value. So, all right, Vanille, have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Have a good day when you wake up. Thanks for tuning in, buddy. All right. So yeah, we just have a little bit of a breakdown here. Let me see here. So I don't know if I covered all of this. I just wanted to talk about the types of data that we could pass in as prop. So we can use any data type as a prop. It can be a string, number, boolean, array, object, function, or a symbol. I'm not really sure 100% what a symbol is. I was looking at it earlier, and it wasn't very clear to me what its purpose was. So it'd be interesting to find out more about that. So inside of the child component now, our hello world, let's take this props array and let us swap over to an objects syntax. So we have a props object, right? The first prop that we have is our message, and we open up an object for that, and we will make sure that it has the type attribute on there, and we want to make sure that it's always going to be a string, right? And that's like that. And if we want, we can have that only be the only attribute on there, so we'll leave that as it is. So the next one we will do is name, and that will be we'll also have the type property on that object, and that will also be a string. And then this is just defining what the type is. So what this is right here is just defining, it's saying that it's going to be the type of a string, a JavaScript string data type kind of thing. So that's more like getting into like typed JavaScript, like TypeScript and whatnot, because it can help kind of like improve the bulletproofness of your code, so to speak, because everything's typed. It knows exactly what it's supposed to be accepting and what it's supposed to be doing. So okay, so the next one we want to do is age, and that will be the same thing. So we open up an object for the props validation, and we will have our type property on there, and then so we're gonna be able to accept two different types of this. Two different types of data types, or whatever. Two different types in this. So the way we do that, we just pass in an array with the different types in there. So string, and then we also want it to be a number, I guess, because we could spell out the age or we could type in the age. And then so in here we will also say in the name, we're going to make sure that we add in a required attribute. So required is technically in there, and it's false by default, so it's the same as not having it in there at all. But if we want to make sure that this name prop is required, then we just set that to true, just like that, and that should be like all we need to do. And if we take this off, you can see that it's going to throw an error, and it's going to say missing required prop name found in wherever it is. So add that back in, get rid of that error. And then so what we can do now is let's give our age a default value in case nothing gets passed in. So default is going to be we'll just do 132 years old. So just kind of old. What are you gonna say? So let's go and see what happens if we delete this age prop on here now and see what that gives us. So if we look in here, the re-render, and you can see age is still in there, but we don't have it passed in. It has a default value of 132. Now if we were to bring this back in, and we can see the required attribute on this, oops, required is true. I just want to see now. If we have a default and a required, then we shouldn't get that error even if nothing is passed in, because we'll have a default fallback, right? And maybe, oh, I guess it still needs it, but whatever. You can see that if it has still has a value in there, so our app wouldn't necessarily break with the default value, but it's still going to be like, well, I'm missing a value. And I think, let's see, if it's not that, let's just do it like that. See what happens. Oh, interesting. Where's my default value? Weird. Anyways, whatever. So I wonder if age was just like an empty string, if that would default it. This empty string is valid, I guess. Well, what if age, well, if, okay, so let's say, let's take off this string and just be able to pass age in. So we're gonna get a check fail right here. It's say prop, invalid prop type. Age was expecting a number with a value 0, but got a string with the value of blank. So basic prop fail or whatever, prop type validation fail. And yeah, I mean, it's really for like edge cases and stuff that you won't have to really get super far in depth with this kind of stuff, but it is really valuable for if you do need it for like big apps and like, you know, whatever you're going to be doing, a major production application. So that's that. I think that will do it for the evening as far as what we were looking at for props. And okay, well, I guess let's see. Before we go any, we haven't really shown any of these props on screen, so let's do that really quick and then we'll wrap things up. So as we showed before in the last stream, we can target and we can display the values of these properties or these props being passed in just by using Vue's string interpolation, and just kind of like they were their own data or computed properties that we can just target as so. So if we want to do, do we have Flexbox in this? I don't think so. Let's just do display flex justify content center and align items. Oops, not a comma, it needs to be a semicolon. Align items, and we will do center as well on that. Let's just see, because I want to get alright, so we will say H1 just here, and we will say, actually, let's get rid of this background color. Alright. Oops, what the heck? Just updating a little bit of styling here, and then I just want to give this a width of 80%. let's take a look at it and see where we're at. Actually, we can just leave it as is. So okay, we have H1. Let's put our message in here. So we just open up a set of double curly braces, and inside of there we just type message, hello from the parent component, and we can do just like it were a data property. So we can do uppercase. So if I want to do a computed property, you do uppercase message, hello from the parent component, all the same, just like it were. It all works the same, so it's pretty neat. And then we can say something like, if we had like an input field here, and we'll do text like that, and we will just do vModel, or actually we can't do vModel because it's a prop, but we can set a placeholder. So if we bind to the placeholder and we set that to name, let's see, like that, and what I want to do is switch the flex direction to column, just like that. Put that underneath it, and yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be super fancy and whatnot. Is this the Chrome extension that you're using? What Chrome extension? Is this the Chrome extension I'm using? Okay. I'm confused. But okay, so anyways, you can see that it passes in that as a placeholder, and then we can just type in something like that. All good and fine and dandy, so it's cool. And that's just an error from previous code. I want to close this. This does not need to be that big, jeez. Okay. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we were passing it, JavaScript pretty much works, you know, like it's supposed to in this stuff. So if we had, like, if we passed in an array to our props and we wanted to target one of the entries, we would just do, you know, add array and then the square brackets and then the index that we want to target. And that can be dynamic, and all that stuff can be dynamic. It's super cool. So I don't know. Pretty neat things. And I hope that this is making some sense. So the Vue.js, oh yeah, sorry. The Vue.js dev tools is a Chrome extension. You can also get it on Mozilla's Firefox as well. So I definitely recommend it. I have the link for the tools in, I believe, episode 2. It might be episode 3, but I think it's episode 2. So they are super helpful. I like it a lot, and they just got a wicked update on them too, so there's a lot more features in there too, so it just makes things, because when we look at this stuff inside of like the normal HTML inspector, you can see it just says data dash v, just, you know, essentially like it's referring to like a Vue node or whatever, a V node, and it's, you know, it doesn't give us kind of any type of like indication on what kind of, which component it is, or, you know, what's going on. It's just, it all is the HTML that it gets broken down to and behind the scenes, and this is what Vue uses to target the HTML with JavaScript bundle that it builds in order to like update stuff properly. And it's pretty interesting. So it would be interesting to, I have been looking more at the source code for Vue just to kind of like learn what's really going on, and I want to learn figure out kind of what they're doing with this, and if that's referring to like a V node or like, you know, what's going on. So cool stuff. But you can see that, I mean, although we do get, you know, our HTML and inspection and stuff, we don't, it's not necessarily the exact same as looking at it through our component tree or our app tree and stuff, where we can see our Vue instance and stuff. We don't get the Vue instance, you know, look capabilities just through the HTML inspector. So yeah, I've heard that Matthew in the chat was saying that he's working on a project, a Laravel framework, and they use Vue for the front end, and I've heard that that's becoming more and more of a popular combination. So cool, glad to hear it. All right, so what I'm gonna do is let's see, where are we at with the main.js? Bunch of blank lines everywhere. We don't need those, so delete that. And I'm gonna push this code to GitHub, and you can go take a look at it and follow along and read through the markdown file, because it's got some more information in there for sure. Some good links, and that it also will have, we have this I think that's in there. I don't know actually. It should be in there. If you clone the repo, it will be in there, because I'll push the file to GitHub as well. So it's hosted there, so you can take a look at that. And yeah, so thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Live Coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript. I really appreciate all the chats, all the connections and stuff. Thank you for everybody who tuned in. If you liked this video, give it a like. Give me a comment if you have any thoughts or tips on ways to improve, and just if you learned something or you have a question to ask, feel free to shoot it in the chat. Head up the Discord, RabbitWerks Discord, which the link is in the description as well. I think that's it. I think, devlife.com, devlfe.com, and use the code RabbitWerks to get 25% off your purchases through that, and good quality developer clothing. So, cool. I think that should do it. So let me push this code to GitHub, and I am super stoked and I hope everything has been sounding good. I've been struggling with the webcam and the microphone, still picking up audio and whatnot. So I had gotten it figured out last night, and it sounds like everything worked pretty well. And I guess we'll see after this. So let's see. Let's push this code to GitHub and call it a session. So what I want to do is we're going to start by making a new branch really quick. So this is Git stuff, so don't feel if this is super confusing, don't worry about it. We'll come back to it. So I'm just going to make a checkout create, and I'm going to check out a new branch, and I'm just going to call it episode 5 dash session end, just like that. Git add all. Git commit -m to do an inline message. Update. End of session. Files pushed for repo. I don't know. Cool. And we will say git push, and then since it's a new branch, we have to set the upstream on this branch, so we do that by doing -u, or we can do -- set upstream, or set space up, or set - upstream. We're not going to do that, just do -u. It's going to be on the origin repo, and then it's just the branch name. So episode 5 session end. And if you just push tab, you'll get the autocomplete stuff, so if you're wondering about that, hit enter, we'll push it up to GitHub. And cool, so I'm gonna pull this open. Not pull request, I just want to see the code. We'll switch over. So I got each episode that we've been doing. Let's just take a look at this really quick. So the LCS Vue Basics live coding sessions. I've been separating out the episodes per branch. So we have the session start and session end branches for each episode. So go ahead and you can check that out. And the master branch is just the session 1 start or whatever. We didn't have a session start, we just had the master branch at that point. But yeah, everything else is organized by session start and then session end, and I realize now that it's backwards with the naming and whatnot, but you'll get the idea. So go ahead and check this repo out if you want, and I will share the link in the description. You can clone it down, and what I'm going to be doing is once we're finished with this series, well, once we're closer to the end of it and stuff, I'm going to just take all the guide markdown files and spin it up as kind of like a static site, docs site, so people can refer to it on a hosted domain kind of thing. So probably through Netlify. That's the plan, at least. So let me share this and then we'll all be done. Now, where is it? Oh, right here. Live control room. All right. And it is in the description, so go ahead and check that out. And again, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Live Coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript. This has been Sean, and I'm super glad to have a face-to-face live session with you now. Well, face-to-screen, I guess, whatever. You get the idea. So have a good night, or have a good day, no matter where you are in the world. Stay awesome, keep coding, and we'll see you next week. And if I just need to click the button. All right, take it easy, people.